Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another version of our webinar series, this time brought to you by our friends at TrueLayer. It's my pleasure to introduce Resh Varmafathan, who is the iGaming lead at TrueLayer, and I will leave it to Resh to take us on. So thank you very much and enjoy.
Thank you for the introduction, Ahmed, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the latest in our series of webinars. We've got a very hot topic to discuss in today's session. We'll be talking about transforming your payment strategy with open banking. Now, as you can see, we've got some interesting speakers joining us this afternoon, who I'll introduce very shortly. But we'll be going over first the agenda and just the format of the webinar. So as I mentioned, I will be doing a quick introduction to the speakers shortly. Then we'll be moving on to our vision for the next generation of player payments. This will be backed up by a recent report we commissioned with YouGov with over 3,000 player respondents. So I'll share some insights and some facts from that. We'll be then moving on to our panel discussion, which will pose some topical questions to our operators and have their points of view as well as a provider's point of view. And then we'll be wrapping up the webinar with an audience Q&A, where we'll be opening up the floor to you lovely viewers and answering your questions. So who do we have speaking today? We've got some heavyweights in the industry. I'm sure you're all familiar. So I'd like to introduce Natalie Dunn, who is the head of payments at Paddy Power Betfair, obviously part of Flutter Entertainment. And we also have Jim Noakes, who is the head of payment innovation and optimization. And I would say GVC, but it's actually rebrand day today, so Entain. And then from TrueLayer's side, we've got Jack Wilson, who is our head of policy and regulatory affairs, and George Davis, who is our product lead for payments here at TrueLayer. And then I'll be moderating here. So hi, I'm Resh. I am the iGaming lead here at TrueLayer. So without further ado, let's get to the meat on the bone. So what do we envisage as our next generation of player payments? And what does this mean for operators? Now, we've highlighted a few areas here, which I'm sure will resonate with all of you here. And I wanted to kind of deep dive into a few of these and bring forward a few insights. So low cost. How do you keep your cost low as you scale your business and try to retain your players in an environment that's becoming increasingly competitive? It means being able to, as a business, keep your costs low across the board. Now, when we talk about instant, what does this actually mean? It means instant pay-ins, which I think the industry is fairly used to, being able to accept payment methods for all your customers. But what does it actually mean for payouts for the customer and trying to increase brand loyalty? And we talk about instant as a whole here for the whole payment cycle from pay-in and payout. Frictionless. Now, this is a topic I'm sure that's plagued many of you. How do you make your sign-up process as short and as less cumbersome as possible for your players? And how do you actually include payments into that flow? And we'll talk about one-click onboarding with payments shortly in the presentation. We talk about highly secure. Now, traditional payment methods out there still use things like iframes, which are highly insecure. And then also there are areas where you're open to fraud. How do you provide an environment for your players to be able to onboard and pay in a secure environment that's got a secure infrastructure? And white labeled, which is probably one of the most interesting for me. Traditionally, payment providers have owned this experience with operators. It means white labeling is a way to bring this all into your own brand. So you're not actually introducing other brands into your payments flow and your payment journeys. Now, all of these together really spell out what we call the holy grail for payments for operators. Now, to back this up, we recently, as I mentioned, commissioned a report with YouGov. The full report is available after the session, which we'll email everybody who signs up. Now, the report covers off, as I mentioned, 3,000 player respondents talking about what they actually want from iGaming payments. And what I've done, I've pulled a few insights from this report and just want to talk about some of the stats that we've gleaned from the report itself. So as you can see here, 1 in 2 players are likely to switch to a service with instant payouts. Now, if you look at the data here, it shows that over 55% are actually likely to switch to a service with instant payouts. And if you dig a little deeper, the insights you get from this are around 28% would actually consider depositing more if they could withdraw their winnings instantly. But if you look at where payments are right now, this isn't really a reality for current payment methods. Slow. With traditional methods like cards, this can take anywhere up to 5 days. Manual bank transfers, anywhere up to 3, even longer. And then you've got digital wallets and online transfers. They may offer instant pay-in, but payouts can still take up to a day. Now, how do you increase that loyalty with your player? By offering both instant payment in and instant payment out, and as an operator, not leaving yourselves up to a financial risk window in settlement timings. There are some of the solutions a bit later on in the presentation. The other stat I wanted to bring your attention to is around onboarding, and now I alluded to this earlier. So this stat shows that 6 in 10 will actually drop off if they're redirected to a service outside to pay. Now, if you look at the data closely, it shows that over 58% are likely to actually abandon sign-up during that process if they were redirected outside of the app or service to make their first payment. And it's usually the first call to action. Now, the insight, or the thing that to really take away from this stat, is it shows that trust is super important. And there are actually implications for solutions that aren't actually white labeled. So traditional players out there for like Trustly, for example. Now, how do you combine onboarding with your payment flow? And we'll come on to how open banking can solve that shortly. And while these next stats aren't from the YouGov report specifically, they actually do illustrate some of the problems that the existing payment methods do have around transaction costs and operators and fraud losses. So transaction costs, this is a really interesting one because traditionally these are methods that you have to have a right to play in the industry. So you're looking at cards, you're looking at digital wallets and proprietary online transfers. They're actually quite high. And the reason why is because the industry's become complacent, and now innovation in the payments industry is shaking that up. The other part of this is around fraud losses. Now, I think the highest area of fraud traditionally has always been card chargeback and unsecure credential sharing or even password storage. And open banking is definitely one of those methods that's looking to solve some of those challenges. So I'm actually going to pass over to my colleague George, who is going to talk a little about how open banking can solve these use cases for operators. George.
Hi, I'm George. I look after all of our payments products at TrueLayer, so I'm excited to run you through a little bit about what we've been doing and how that looks to you and your players. Fundamentally, open banking lets you connect directly to a player's bank account via open APIs. So whether this might be to take a payment or to verify identity or even take out data to understand affordability, etc. And so the key thing here is that with open banking and what we call open payments, funds are transferred instantly from one bank account to another via open APIs, so via secure, regulated APIs, unlike with screen scraping and credential sharing. The player's funds are taken from their account after one authorization and sent straight through to your bank account. And so at no point are you waiting with a merchant account in the middle. At no point are you waiting because you haven't paid as much to get the instant settlement payment options. That money goes straight away to the operator's bank for one fee at the fastest speed that we can possibly do it at. And so this provides some really important benefits for operators all over the UK and Europe. And so fundamentally, the best journeys are on mobile that we find. And so we optimize our payment service for mobile payments, regardless of whether you start on desktop or on mobile. So we get that user onto their phone and they can continue that journey back on the desktop when they're done authenticating. What's really important is we get them through a biometric authentication method. And so this leads to a more secure and safe experience for consumers, but it also means that you can be a little bit more comfortable with the risk that you're taking as you can verify that that person is who they say they are through their bank's authentication method. So you're going through strong customer authentication flows at every single point, and it's all really familiar to your end consumer because it's within their bank app that they've already installed, they already use daily to check their funds. And on top of that, you get a lot of good benefits for yourself, like 80% savings and beyond on card fees. And so instead of paying for chargebacks, instead of paying banking, you're actually just paying a really small fixed fee to get your money out of that bank account and into the operation banks. And so on top of that, the kind of golden nugget for us, the biggest benefit is that we can provide instant settlement over direct payment rails. But we also know that open banking on its own isn't really a great payment method. It's thought about 50% of the problems, but not 100%. And so one thing that we do is we tend to think in terms of a payments product rather than an open banking product. And so on top of open banking, we've also directly integrated into schemes such as faster payments, SEPA Credit, SEPA Instant, that are normally only automated by banks or backdoor hacks like screen scraping out of your own accounts. And we're bringing them to any operator. So regardless of your regulatory status, you can then get access to not only take the payment via open banking, but then verify their identity using the information that we get provided as a institution on faster payments. And then once that user comes to withdraw, we can give you completely unlimited instant withdrawals. So regardless of the original top-up fee, you can actually then send any amount of withdrawal over those instant payment schemes that they first came back, the payment first came in from. And so we're creating a closed loop so that you're completely AML and KYC friendly. And so how we do this, so on the pay-in side, we leverage your player's bank to receive instant payments directly into your bank account with no middleman. So this is the pure open banking of the journey. So your user will go straight through and choose to top up, choose an amount to top up, choose their bank, all within your flow, not within TrueLayer's, and then be redirected straight through to their bank app with app-to-app authentication. So at no point, again, are they going to see a TrueLayer link. They're going to go straight through and authenticate with their fingerprint or their Face ID, and then get redirected back to your app, whether it be on mobile or on desktop, where we'll continue the journey if they chose to hand off and authenticate on mobile, but started on desktop. And then when they come to withdraw, we offer instant withdrawals directly over an instant payment scheme that they use to top up with. So if they use SEPA Instant, we're going to pay back via SEPA Instant. If they use faster payments, we'll pay back via faster payments. And so what we've created is an end-to-end funding solution entirely within your own brand. And this is really important to us. So you go from your end user's account with one click through to their bank account, and that money travels straight through with biometric authentication and completely unlimited payouts. And so how this actually looks in implementation is almost entirely down to you. And so players see two brands, yours and their bank. And this is really, really important because your users trust you because they've signed up to your service. They've signed up to play on your service. And so they've trusted you with their money. They've trusted you with their identity. And at the same time, they trust their bank because this is where they leave all their money, their livelihood. And this is one of the most common apps opened on the phone is the banking app. And so at no point are we asking the user to trust TrueLayer. And so we will then prompt the user to use an existing account or link a new one using our account ownership verification. So if you've already verified their account, you can send them straight through and you can lock the payment directly to that account that you verified. And if you haven't, instead of actually doing a lengthy verification process or even using account information services and doing a double authentication, you can actually just verify that user with their payment. And if that user's account isn't the account that you're expecting, you can reverse that payment before it hits your bank account. Or if it is, if you verified that name and it's exactly who you thought it would be, you can then allow those funds to be played with immediately without waiting for a second authentication to take another payment or do a data check or without actually verifying the user via a bank statement. And so this allows you to go from deposit decision to the player's bank straight away. There's no login, there's no brand check. As soon as you know that they want to add some money to their account, within one click, you can go straight through. So in this case, the user's chosen their Barclays account and they want to top up £10. Authentication will then be handled entirely by the player's bank, so no need for any clunky usernames, passwords, just a fingerprint or a Face ID. So we're not asking them to remember any credentials at all, and use essentially the one login that you can't forget, your face or your finger. And then settlement happens immediately. So within seconds, money moves from your player's bank to yours using the fastest payment rail available. So if that account is faster payments connected, we'll use that. If it's SEPA Instant, we'll use SEPA Instant. Same for SEPA Credit. And then when they want to withdraw, it's even easier. There's no need to actually send your user to TrueLayer or send them to their bank. Within one click, they can withdraw. So they don't need to remember there is no authentication. They tell you how much, send that to us, and we're going to execute that payment immediately to the end user with no authentication on your side or on the user's side.
Thank you for that, George. Great overview. And he was talking about our product there, which is PayDirect, which is the full closed loop cycle of payments. But we can share more information on that after the presentation. So the interesting part of the webinar, the panel discussion. So I'll be moderating this. And as I mentioned, I did a quick intro to our speakers, but it'll be just a quick intro from Natalie. If you just want to introduce yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Natalie Dunne, and I work for Flutter, where I lead payments for both the Paddy and Betfair brands in each of the different markets that we're in. So UKI, Europe, rest of the world, LATAM, all the exciting ones. I've been in the company for about 4.5 years and been in the payments industry for about 10, working across different verticals, gaming now, but I've been in digital and retail in the past.
Thank you, Natalie. And Jim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Jim Noakes. I'm Head of Payment Innovation. I've been working for Entain for all of 15 hours now, since we rebranded this morning. So GVC, Ladbrokes, Coral, Gala, Bwin, Party, pick a brand. We're behind it somewhere. We look after payments on a worldwide basis. Less involved in America; they do their own thing. But as far as MGM is concerned, anyway. But looking at this, and I'm really interested and excited about where open banking is going to take us.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. And thank you both for joining us today. And Jack, if you want to do a quick intro to yourself, that would be fantastic.
Hi, I'm the Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at TrueLayer. Joined a year ago from the Financial Conduct Authority, and I look after our engagement with regulators and policymakers.
Thank you very much for that, Jack. And George, you've done your intro, so I'll skip you. So we'll all be posing some questions to the speakers. So without further ado, the first question that we're posing to them are around payments. So are payments a good thing, and are they really instant? Now, we alluded to this earlier in the presentation, but we talk about payments in and payments out here. So I'll throw this question out to Natalie, if you want to start.
Yeah, no problem. So I think you have definitely alluded to it already in the presentation. Are payments instant? Yes, question mark. I think when you look at pay-ins, yes, they are. I think when you look at the most of Europe now, pay-ins are instant. There's obviously a lot that operators do on their side around having safer gambling rules that make some of them not so instant. But from a general perspective, pay-ins are instant. When we look at payouts, that's not really the case. And I do believe that should you be able to pay in instantly, you should be able to get your funds out instantly as well. You as a customer should have full control of what's yours. And that's not the case in Europe at the moment. I think, we look at Visa Direct, that's a solution, but it's only there for a small portion of customers based on obviously what card type they have. And then we look at the different e-wallets. Yes, there are instant withdrawals as well, but it's not really back to your bank account. So if you don't want to use those funds elsewhere, you have to then initiate the process of actually getting it back to your bank account.
That's super interesting. And Jim, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we talk about instant pay-ins, and I think the gambling customers have been long been used to using their debit card and getting the funds straight away. But you've got to remember that as far as the finance director is concerned, he's not getting his money to 2-3 days later. So people tend to forget about that side of the settlement, and the funds flow into gambling companies potentially coming in a lot quicker, not just on the way out. So I think that's there, and we've already touched on payouts. I mean, 2 to 5 days on cards is the standard experience for most customers. That's in there. Let's face it, if instant was really the thing, then PayPal and Skrill would be a far bigger player than they actually are. It's not the be all and end all. There's other things that we'll come on to, I think, in the ecosystem here. So I think same day would be instant for a lot of people, and that's where we can work towards. We've always got the checks and balances. Natalie said responsible gambling or whatever it might be in this. So I think getting to a much faster flow in both directions can only benefit customers and companies.
And you touched upon it there, Jim, the settlement timings. Now, Natalie, you mentioned that we had instant pay-ins, and that's kind of the standard in the industry. And that's from a player's perspective, which it is instant. And I'd love to hear your views on what that means for having instant settlement in and having those funds readily available to the company. And how do you think that's going to affect the business? Natalie, sorry.
I think it depends. It depends on what contract or deal that you have with each of your providers. Some of them you can have T+1, but that varies from providers that you work with. I think it's a no-brainer based on everything that George talked through. In open banking, it's money in and out straight away, but it's also money in and out back to the operator straight away. There isn't a delay. Especially some of the challenges that we have with net settlements, because you're taking in deposits, then you have all these withdrawals coming out, and you're trying to manage them both through your cash flow. It's quite a challenge because it can take days. Obviously, their cards are pretty straightforward, but then when you look at other payment methods, I think even looking at manual bank transfers, for us, they're not really instant because there's a lot of people intervention that has to happen. So if you think about that, a customer experience is awful because they can go onto our cashier and they see, okay, these are the bank details that I can pay into my Paddy account. They do the deposit. It could take their bank 2 days before we actually see it in our bank. Then we have to manually intervene, put it into their account, all very slow. So I think open banking is definitely the answer to that from both perspectives.
Fantastic. And Jim, anything to add there?
No, I don't think so.
And just to that point, Natalie, one of the, I think, interesting things there you've highlighted, while the settlement timings, the windows can shorten, there's the other side of it that operators may not consider because it's not always a tangible problem, which is if it's slow for the customer and then the funds are settling to you, the issues of missing payments or the issues of customers getting in touch for querying payments and the operational cost to the business to be able to handle things like that. That's also another area that it gets missed because it's not really seen. It's just a KPI that's measured. Now, I don't know if that's affected either of you two at all.
Yeah, I think my payment ops teams would tell you all about that because you're putting the control in the customer's hands. So they're taking your bank account details and they're sending them funds to you. You can tell them, please put in this reference so we can locate your deposit. That doesn't always happen. So there is a lot of going back and forth to customers trying to figure out, okay, you said you put it in this date. Did you use your reference? No, I just sent the money, sent €100 over to Paddy. I don't really know what else. So yeah, I definitely think my ops team would tell you that it's the very silent thing that happens in the background that no one really knows about, but it's definitely an operational impact.
And Jim, do you face similar issues?
I mean, it's similar, but it is small. But like you say, it's one of those hidden things that doesn't get counted very well. We do look at it because I think frustration on the payout delays is one of the biggest metrics that we measure in terms of impact to customer services. We talk about T+1 settlement, next day on cards. It's banking days, not working days. Customers don't understand a banking day that when you've got 4-day weekends like Easter and things like that the clock only starts ticking from the next day when the banks are back in the office. That all gets lost, and so you get the spike in queries. So I think moving to everyone expects an Amazon view of the world where if I click a button and I can't have it now, it's too slow. So that's what we're up against in terms of setting expectations here.
Fantastic, and thank you for that, Jim. So if there aren't any more comments, I'm going to move on to the next question. Unless, George, I don't know if you had a view on from our side.
I think this is where services that are built around bank transfer rails really win out, especially with what Jim was just saying about banking days versus real days. So using services like faster payments, we get 24/7 coverage. So no matter when the payment goes in, it's going to go through immediately, and we're not going to batch it either. So as soon as you're comfortable releasing those funds, gets them in their pocket immediately. And so I think we really strongly benefit from new infrastructure providing these instant payments rather than kind of adding on top of older infrastructure like cards that might take slightly longer to settle, where not all parties are really benefiting from providing instant settlement and are only doing it because they're mandated to.
And one thing I would like to highlight, maybe for people who are thinking about responsible gambling with instant payments, Jim, you raised a point a while back, and I'd like to kind of raise it again if it's okay, but around instant payments and responsible gambling, if you'd like to give your view on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Natalie did touch on it. The point is there will always be a disconnect between a customer making a payout request and us sending the money. Now that traditionally that's been a fraud and risk thing. Has your trading team got it wrong? Have they settled an event? Or they've left an event up for too long so the outcome's known and all of the Sharpies pick it up on your website. You've always got a safeguard against that thing. But I mean, I think one of the things that move into this instant world, and with the UK Gambling Commission's recent pronouncement earlier on this year about the fact that the practice of cancelling withdrawals that are in progress had to cease. So once a customer makes that request, it's got to go. It takes away all of that holding it on till midnight because it's not going to go into the banking system. So I think the important thing that we're going to have to measure, and one of the tenets that Entain now is flying the flag on very highly, is to be super responsible. We know that a lot of customers use that payout delay, and that's what the Gambling Commission say, as inbuilt cooling off periods. So they know that once they've made that request, they can't get at it until the next day when the money gets back into their bank account. So if we now change that totally, then they can, it's back in their current account through this system straight away. Then they could technically spend it with us again and then withdraw it a bit more and then spend it again. So all of that cycling round from a cost and an irresponsible behaviour is something that we're going to have to monitor very carefully in this to make sure we get the right balance between getting customers' money back safely and doing the right thing so they can't instantly get tempted to push, just another $5 back in.
Sure. And I think, George, the interesting thing about what open banking can provide actually helps solve that challenge. If you want to provide a tiny bit more information there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all within, with the customization with open banking, it's all within your hands as an operator. So, firstly, you can control when you send that request. So you can build in those cool-offs to wherever you're comfortable. So you can go beyond the average or below the average, etc., depending on your customer. I think the second thing to think about there as well is that open banking is more than just payments. Whilst we talked a lot about payments today, you can also leverage account information services to understand your player a little bit better and maybe customize those call-offs a little bit more and understand how much they can afford to gamble, how much they can't, whether they're gambling with other operators, and generally how much income they have going through their accounts. And that can help educate you on actually how to be a more responsible operator for your customer. And so I think there's building that trust of your user and bringing payments back into your brand. You can also control these things within your own brand as well now. So you don't have to be beholden to call-offs inbuilt cards. You can decide your own.
Thank you for that, George. Jack, is there anything to weigh in from your side?
No, I think we can move on.
Perfect. Thank you. So the next question, again, I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, but I thought it was very important to highlight here, which is how important is white labeling and having an own brand experience to operators. So Jim, I'm going to start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think when it comes to payments and let's face it, all gambling companies do is move money around and provide a little bit of entertainment on the way. But what we're saying is here, trust with our customers is paramount. If the customer doesn't trust you, then you're on a slippery slope to start with. So even though we've got big brands, we've got big labels out there that have got that visibility, when the customer comes in for the first time, they don't really know what the experience is going to be. And so you've got to build that, and getting their first payout promptly is one of the key things that reinforces that a customer comes back. See loads and loads of customers that come in, they put their deposit in, they actually lose it because they're unlucky, they never actually get to do a payout request, so they can't make that judgment call, and then they're just going on the play experience and how slick it's all been or not, to decide whether to come back or not and respond to the next bonus or whatever. So I think when it comes to this particular aspect of payments, Visa and MasterCard are brands that customers understand. No brainer. PayPal is pretty much up there. Skrill and Neteller have got brand presences that are known to the poker players and that sort of market. So it's those are brands where there's a lot of movement around between operators on those, and it was that's why most of those got their place. Because it was a way that they could move their funds around very quickly because of the same day instant pay in pay out experience that you didn't end up with having to pull back to your card. And then when it comes to payments, the less people in that chain that have got to be trusted, the better it is. So the next thing after us and the modicum of trust that we've engendered is seeing a bank logo that the customer will recognise. How we pick it out of the 15 brands in the main 15 brands in the UK is going to be challenging enough, and across Europe it's even more complicated. But nonetheless, surfacing that so the customer knows that it's their bank and it's not us trying to fish or anyone else as a middleman attack trying to fish is going to be absolutely key in this. So the minimum number of layers in there that we've got to get customers to trust is important. So I think it's vital.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that, Jim. And Natalie, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think I'd 100% agree with Jim. I think when you think about it, there's a lot of open banking brands out there at the moment. But from a payments perspective, yes, we know about it because we're in the industry. But for a normal customer on the street, they don't know the difference between any of the brands. So I think, if we want to try and push open banking, it is something that we're going to have to attach our brands to. Like I've joked about the Paddy Pay, the Betfair Pay internally, but I think it is something that, we need something to make customers trust it, that they'll click on the button and they'll move to the next stage to be able to see what their banks are behind it. So I don't know if a brand is going to do it or if it's like a name. So you say like pay by bank or pay by bank transfer, something like that. Like when you look at Brazil as an example, and completely outside Europe, but Pix just went live, I think, less than a month ago. It's obviously a bank transfer payment method, but overnight it's just become an absolute success where customers, like once they see that brand, it just means something to them. And I don't know, given obviously how many banks and how many open banking providers there are in Europe, if it's going to be such a success or in our side. So I think like we do need to use our brands to give that bit of kind of loyalty, the bit of trust to customers so that they will obviously, be open to use the payment method. Especially even like this, when you touch on the point that George made around the AISP side of things, you're giving your data to somebody. You need to know what's behind that, like who's getting the data. So if it's from a safer gambling point of view, if we're taking the customer's data, I'm sure they'd be a lot more comfortable knowing that, oh, look, Paddy Pay is taking my data because they need to do an affordability check on me, rather than saying X open banking company is doing it, which they don't really know much about.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That's quite an interesting point of view. I mean, it sounds like there's a consensus amongst operators that white labeling is important to increase that level of trust between the player and the operator. George, I'd love to hear your point of view on this.
I mean, to touch on something that you've both brought up is trust, and specifically Jim on the trust from that first payout. And I think something really important is the white labeling has to go through and through. It can't just be a white labeled UI, but no white labeling in the actual payment experience. And so one thing that was really important to us when we built this service was that when customers are receiving payouts, they're receiving payouts from you, not from us. So seeing a TrueLayer, a Trustly, or someone on a bank statement isn't good for our customer. We want them to see a Paddy Power or an Entain on their bank statement, so that they completely trust us end to end. We don't want them to have any area where they might question, oh, did I actually make my payment through TrueLayer? Who's TrueLayer? And so we've gone to massive extremes to make sure it's completely white labeled to increase that trust. And I think it's pretty well known in the industry that increasing that trust increases future. It's really in everyone's benefit to white label as much as possible. Despite the benefits that maybe a brand brings some customers with you, it also allows you to operate without being tied to a brand. So if you didn't like the deal you got from a certain brand and you change provider, you might lose some customers. With a service that's completely white labeled like open banking, you get all that benefit of owning that customer yourself and owning their trust. So I think it's only a good thing.
Thank you for that, George. And I want to kind of add to that, which is something we just touched upon in the previous question, which is having providers where they're not associated with your brand coming up on bank statements, again, is another operational nightmare because you're getting increased, volume spikes in who are these guys? I don't know who they are, and then that kind of query then comes back to you, and it's just not associated with your brand. And so having that brand association with payments under your own umbrella also has an added benefit in the background outside of actually of trust as well. So that's something to kind of key to highlight. The other part I also wanted to bring up now, white labeling as a whole is, Natalie, you almost touched upon it there, which is, do you go down the avenue of having a true, a brand at pay sort of experience, or is it just kind of instilling that trust level with your customer where there's an instant pay option? Which do you think is more important, or how do you think consumers or even your players would react to having a Paddy Pay or an instant transfer option? Which do you think they would prefer, or where do you think the love would be?
I think I'm still on the fence on this one, to be honest. I'd like to think that customers do trust us enough as a brand. I think definitely on the Paddy Power brand, we definitely know that people trust it. It's extremely positive, great brand out there. But I still am on the fence as to whether they prefer to see something like that's pay by bank transfer or Paddy Pay. I think definitely we probably need to do some research in advance and some customer surveys to see if they'd be comfortable with it. We know, we have our own prepaid card and customers are pretty happy with it. They're pretty confident that having a card that says Paddy Power on it is something that they can trust and something they can use. I know it does have obviously two of the main key providers out there that are obviously the two trusting, which is Visa and MasterCard on them as well. But I would like to think that yes, the customers could trust as a brand and that they would prefer to pick a Paddy Pay option over just a simple bank transfer.
Sure. Thank you for that. And Jim, I want to pose a question to you because obviously there are a very large stack of brands under the Entain umbrella. So how would you view that question?
A bit like Natalie, I think this is one of those classic cases that ABC testing is going to be essential in the early days so that we work out what's there. From my perspective, one of my frustrations is that we still use some variant of a Doric temple as the icon in this space to signify the next greatest thing in payments. But when you look at it, the ability, a lot's going to depend on how the banks promote it to their customer base. They're promoting it very heavily and hopping on the open banking platform. Obviously, NatWest would love you to manage your Barclays account and your Lloyds account through your NatWest account. And it's your NatWest app that you get the view of all of your bank accounts from. That's where they're coming from. And so it's in their interest to try and promote how wonderful their bank apps are and what they can do with it. And so that's going to lead in part where we go with this, I think, because then if the banks are started to make some particular channel recognisable, then we'd be daft to ignore it. But on the flip side, then having something that wraps our brand trust around it and everything that we're trying to do with it equally could work. So we might see two icons in parallel that actually do exactly the same behind the scenes, but we'll have tracking links all over the place to work out which ones get the use from the customers. I think rolling this into the market and the sort of the early adoption type stuff. You can only look at the banks that are more pushing their bank app, and it's a really nice behind the scenes experience, and then finding some way of targeting that bank's customers to see whether they will pick it up. Because converting existing customers over to open banking instead of using cards or PayPal, is a way that we get that knowledge easier because we know who they're banking with already. Putting it on your cashier for a first-time deposit journey, you haven't got a clue what that customer's got behind the scenes. So I think there's going to be a lot of ABCs in this before we settle on what the most appropriate solution is.
Perfect. And I just want to flip that question slightly the other way around. We talked about it a bit earlier in the presentation, but I want to give it a bit more airtime. We talked about some of the challenges of onboarding and making things frictionless, and it kind of falls into white labeling that experience of kind of onboard your customer as quickly as possible. And then when you get to that first call to action of payments, you're immediately handing over to another brand. Now, in that scenario where you're able to white label that entire experience of being able to understand who your customer is and get them to make their first payment, that becomes a really strong white labeled proposition. George, I just want to, if you could touch upon the one-click onboarding would be super useful, just to give the audience a bit more view on what's possible with open banking.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's two ways to approach onboarding with open banking, and we've chosen to go in a value-add way. Others might choose to go in a core open banking way. And so, the way you could power onboarding without the payment in with open banking is to go down the AISP route, which we talked a little bit about for actually grabbing data from the bank account, but it can be used to verify the identity of the user. And so you can log in, authenticate, and then give the operator access to your name, account number, and sort code, or name and IBAN in Europe, so that then they can add that bank account to an approved list of bank accounts, verify your name, and rely on that strong customer authentication to verify the end user. The way that we actually recommend account verification is to use a payment so that you get less friction in the flow. So instead of asking the user to authenticate for AIS and then authenticate for PIS and making the top up, we're actually saying do one top up and we'll provide you all the information that we get from faster payments and from SEPA when you make that name, account number, sort code, or name and IBAN, depending on location, to verify with, so that you get one-click onboarding rather than multiple-click onboarding. And so we strongly believe that onboarding should be coupled with the payment. The payment's the most important part. And so we've brought that all together rather than relying on the core parts of open banking to do that.
Thank you for that, George. Just conscious of time, guys, I'm going to actually skip on to the next question. What are customers' preferences? What are customers' preferences for payment methods across Europe, and how is this changing? I'd love to chuck that question over to Jim. I know you've got some interesting points of view here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the European landscape is much more bank transfer oriented already. They haven't got the same propensity to use cards, the same as the UK has got. PayPal has got its place or whatever, and we don't see a lot of changes. But bank payments have got their place, despite the technology. So the fact that there's been screen scraping out there, and if you didn't take SOFORT in Germany, then you didn't have a business, or those sorts of things. It's moving on, and I think this can only it can only make things better. The market, it ought to be ripe for embracing open banking because the journey will be much slicker. And we've proved time and time again, if you make it easy for customers, they will do it. You can put all of the privacy notices and the consent stuff in there that you absolutely have to. And as a responsible operator, you absolutely have to pay proper notice of that, not lip service notice to it. But if you make it easy, then it will work. And I think that's where, this ought to roll out. But, the European banking network and the way that the banks approach things is a lot more fragmented because of that. So it's not going to be easy by any means. But I think there's it's more of a no-brainer than the UK market is, with everyone loving Visa debit. So I think we just have to see where it goes.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. And Natalie.
Yeah, I think definitely everything that Jim said is correct. I think if you look at the European market, it hasn't really changed in terms of its preferences over the last few years. I think the big things that we've seen have been payment methods pulling out of different markets or regulation changing, like Norway, obviously this week. A lot of people lost a lot of payment methods due to the PaySafe group pulling out. And then obviously Ideal in the Netherlands years ago, that changes obviously customers' preferences, but not by choice, by force. And obviously we've seen the pays come in, but still they're card payments. I think the big thing for me, for years I've been really hoping that open banking did catch on. And I think when we saw during the summer with the Captain Tom Moore, revolutionized open banking, people who didn't know about it was like, wow, what is this? And that was millions and millions of people used it because they had no other choice. That was the only payment method. So I think that was a complete proof that open banking would work in the UK. And I think, Ireland and the UK are very similar. So I think it's that we could easily push from the rest of Europe into UKI and get them to rethink their Visa debit mindset and to see how easy open banking can be. And definitely, I think with PSD2 obviously coming on the 1st of January, not knowing what is going to happen, I think we know that the experience with open banking is a much better one. It's tried and tested. We have no idea what the experience is going to be with cards from the 1st of Jan. So I think it's a no-brainer that we can push it as an e-commerce industry. We can push it from an igaming perspective, because it just ticks all the boxes. Yeah, definitely security, speed. You went through them at the start. It just makes sense.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to the next question because I think this is going to be quite interesting for everybody here as well, around regulation in iGaming across Europe. Now, this is a big and broad question, so I'm going to focus in on a couple of key territories, and then we'll speak about some of the other markets in the EU and further afield. I want to start with where it's changing quite quickly in the UK. As many of you know, the UK GC have kicked off a review of the Gambling Act. Obviously, that hasn't been reviewed since 2005. Now, what does that kind of mean for operators? And I'd love to really understand it from Natalie's point of view. From Jim's point of view, and then we'll go on to Natalie.
I mean, they might not have reviewed the Gambling Act for that time, but they've changed the regulations virtually every year since then. So, I mean, you can't say that this is a static thing by any stretch of the imagination. I think when it comes to it, the absolute thing that the regulators are honing in on is the ownership of payment instrument to the identity that gets checked. It's long been a bone of contention and disbelief that we don't know that the card name on a debit card payment actually belongs to the customer. That you can, if the customer's honest, then you tell them off. If they're dishonest, then you never know. That will change with 3DS2, but it's still that lack of clarity on ownership. So one of the points that George mentioned earlier on, I think the UK regulation says we have to verify an identity prior to taking payment. So it's really difficult to link that first transaction with the identity checks, and I think that's where one thing that we've got to bear in mind. We have to pass an identity check before we can move to a payments page. So things like the PayPal linked journey got chucked out because even earmarking a deposit prior to doing the verification check was too much for some, just in case that earmarked deposit went astray, went into a suspense account somewhere or something like that. So it's quite a tricky area. But I think there's nonetheless the sort of thing that was talked about to make sure that the bank, the name and details that go on that bank account are locked and confirmed. This is going to be a big help in that battle, and will lead us on to the bigger things. So the things like the source of funds and affordability and all the rest of it. I think it's a long way for customers to go down that path yet. But with the credit agencies and the banks and mortgages and all the rest of it, it's now becoming the way that customers verify their income and expenditure. Because it's easy. So I think that link. UK and Germany are exactly the same, and the other regulators will follow suit. We have to have much more confidence that the name on the bank account and the ownership of those funds is actually the identity that we're working with.
Thank you, Jim. Some great insight there. And Natalie?
Yeah, I think like everything Jim said is correct. We definitely welcome the new Gambling Act because, as you said, it was 2005. It's good to bring it into the digital age. But yeah, I think it's going to be really positive. I think obviously it's going to be challenging, but that doesn't mean it has to be negative. I think open banking definitely leads the way and helps us with that because, yes, we have been asked for years from the UKGC and different other regulators to confirm that the card name is actually the account holder, but yeah, as Jim said, it absolutely baffled them that there was no way of doing that. And we have reached out to Visa and MasterCard and asked them, but there isn't really that technology there. So it is obviously amazing that open banking can enable that. And then obviously the different checks that we have around affordability, KYC, knowing our customers, etc. Again, it'll help us. It's obviously not going to solve all the problems, but it is obviously a starting ground to getting there and to meeting the needs of what they do want to see in the different regulators. And I guess even like when you look at Sweden, Bank ID was kind of one of the first steps in the industry where we saw the regulators really being able to verify the payment and the customer all in one together.
Thank you very much for that. And Jack, I'm sure you'll have a view here.
Well, it's already been covered. I mean, open banking has inbuilt verification. Every time a payment is made using open banking payments, the customer is asserting themselves to the bank that they are who they say they are. So if the name on the bank account that's used for open banking payments matches the name that the operator has, then jobs are good. And it's different if you're just relying on a piece of plastic that a fraudster could have picked up anywhere or on the dark web or stolen. Completely different.
Thank you for that. And just a little reminder to the audience, we're leaving a little time towards the end, so please do pop your questions into the Q&A and we'll get round to those towards the end of the presentation. So thank you for that. And just to kind of round up on the last question here before we get to the audience Q&A, what impact, we've touched upon it earlier, but what impact will responsible gambling regulations have on UK payments specifically? I'd love to understand your thoughts on that, Jim.
Yeah, I think it's very much close to the previous one. That ownership method, ownership and the link through into source of funds and affordability. And like I said, we proved time and again, if we make it easy for customers, they will do it. And so, the challenges that my colleagues on the RG team get at the moment when challenging customers to say, OK, so where's that money come from? Can you afford it? Can you afford this much per week, per month, per whatever? And they get then sent, a set of disparate bank statements, half information about outgoings or whatever, and they're expected to make a judgment call then on whether to allow that customer to carry on playing or not, or impact something and suffer the consequences if they don't get it right. It's a really it's a really tricky area to work out, one person's affordability versus another person's affordability, because, I could supply, well, not personally, but, I could supply a bank statement that says my income is 100,000 a year. If my mortgage is 3 million, it's not going to do me any good. So you've got to do that. So I think that this whole business about open banking and getting customers used to open banking as a way of doing business Starting from payments, moving into the verification side of things, and then onto the affordability and responsibility. It's a staircase, and it's all part of a journey. And it supports the industry in its aspirations, rather than something that the regulator then enforces us to take steps on, and we end up with something that we don't want or don't like.
Thank you very much for that. And Natalie, just your point of view on this.
Yeah, I think obviously the changes makes payments more responsible. Earlier this year, we obviously saw the credit card ban, which in essence was to make it more responsible for customers to deposit and to play. So any of the new changes coming with affordability, as Jim said, we can use obviously the open banking rails where it's easier than a customer sending in their bank statements, and obviously you're creating a manual process for the customer, you're creating a manual process and an operational overhead for the company as well. But using open banking, yes, you are getting a tunnel vision of what the customer has, because yes, you see the salary coming in, but you see one customer's bank account, they might have 10 different bank accounts. So they could use the Revolut for open banking and not use their main NatWest bank account where they have about 10 loans or whatever. So it is really hard to see. So, it is going to be a help having open banking when we obviously see all these changes come in next year. But I think we definitely need to kind of challenge ourselves, and definitely the RD teams in all our organisations need to challenge how we can do this. But it is definitely a step in the right direction to be more responsible.
Thank you very much for that. And that gives us a bit of time to open up the floor to the audience Q&A. So bear with me 1 second, guys. I'm just going to bring up the first question. So from Anthony Medicia, what's your strategy for getting players to adopt and embrace open banking? And will you offer an incentive to encourage players to use open banking? Who would like to answer that one first?
I can answer it. I guess, I think Leo Vegas went live with open banking recently, and I know they published some very good numbers. I think 10% of their new customers signed up to open banking. And I think when I saw that stat, it nearly fell off my chair because it's all my dreams come true. But yeah, I think it's just the same as we encourage customers to use other payment methods. You do the right level of marketing. I don't know if you need to incentivize customers. I think you just need to explain to them the benefits of using it and how, it is much better from a lot of different perspectives.
Thank you for that. Jim?
Yeah, I think that's right. It is, the whole thing that the open banking payments ought to be cheaper than the existing methods out there. Again, you're looking into the way that you look at, the other wallet providers, which are a lot more higher cost to us than cards, and so we'd be daft not to try and work out a way of steering it. Like you say, instant payouts might be carrot enough without having to go as far as incentivization, and get people used to it that way. Rather than we push enough bonuses out there as it is, and the challenge again around the responsible gambling regulations. That extra deposit 20, get 10 just because you use an open banking. You've got to be quite careful with those sorts of messages that you're encouraging people just to deposit more these days. But I think the whole thing about making sure that it's a wrap for the customer to be able to do it, working with the banks that are leading on it and getting those customers migrated across first, looking at some of your higher value VIP customers as a way of doing things, because those are the ones that we all operate quite intensive manual faster payment route out at the moment, because we want them to get same day payments already. And when you're going on to a pence per transaction type models as opposed to percentage models, then the higher the value of the payment is, the more you can save. So I mean, we've just got to look at it. The key for this all is making sure that it's a good customer experience in both directions, and then you've got something to be able to model on.
Thank you for that, Jim. And we've got another question from the audience on how do I know I've actually received money and your payment is actually successful? George, you can probably answer that one.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple ways. So the bank is going to tell you that the payment has executed. So various different, and they are immutable. So you're going to receive your final states could be a cancelled, so the user didn't go through the flow. It could be failed, so the bank likely stopped the payment for fraud reasons. Rejected, which is insufficient funds. Your final one, which is executed, which means the payment has officially left the end user's bank account and is with the payment scheme. You will then receive from us, outside of open banking, you'll receive a settlement notification. And this is using our faster payments integration. So you can know that your money has been received and it is now on your books. And then finally, you're going to see the money land in your bank account. So you're going to see that settlement on your books when you next go and refresh your bank feed, however you might be doing that. And so you know that the money's moving as soon as you get that executed status, and you know that the money's there once you see that settled one.
Thank you very much. I know that we are very short on time, so I just wanted to wrap up with a question to both of our speakers. I guess the interesting question for me is, how is open banking going to change iGaming payments in 2021 for both of you? If anyone would like to answer that. I'm going to pick someone. Natalie, do you want to start?
Go on. Okay, sorry, I'll go. I thought Jim was going to go there. So how do I think? I think 2021 is going to be the year that open banking just breaks ground, to be honest. I think we've got so many drivers that is helping us have a brilliant business case internally to invest the time and the effort to get it as one of our key payment methods. So yeah, I think it's going to be the year of open banking. I think there's so many reasons, from a safer gambling perspective, from an AML perspective, from all the different regulations that we have out there. The changing landscape in Europe, PSD2, there's just so much happening. I think it's like 2021 is just the year when payments changes. And yeah, I think I'm really positive about it.
Thank you. And Jim, just quickly while we have a minute or two.
Yeah, my last minute. I mean, I can remember when, for verification purposes, we were having the debates internally about whether customers would send us electronic copies of their driving licenses to verify. And the privacy people said they wouldn't do it. And they've done it in their dozens. So I think with open banking, you know, there will be privacy statements, there will be consent notices or whatever. Customers will get used to it, and that's what will drive this through. We make it easy, and you know, it's incumbent upon all of us to make the journey slick, foolproof, no drop-offs to worry about, so that we don't drive customer service contact. And if we do that, then yes, this will snowball. I'm absolutely convinced of it next year. You know, we won't have to worry about the C word, and we can get back to normal business, hopefully, all vaccinated.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. And that wraps us very nicely towards the end. So I just want to thank both Natalie and Jim. Thank you very much for your time. Very exciting conversation. And everyone, please do look out for our iGaming report that we'll be sending through to you. This is the YouGov report. We'll be sending this via email. So if anyone that's signed up and if anyone that's watching, please do, if you want to get in touch, my details are there. Connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me a message. But thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.